Right. I hope everybody can see my screen. So welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Angelina, pronouns she, her. I'm a campaigner at Campax. Some of you may already have heard of us. Some of you may have actually received my email with the invitation for this. We are a Swiss campaign organization. We are completely independent from governments and corporations, which makes us really independent and super cool. We are also a community of 300,000 people all across the country in all 3 languages, which makes us the biggest NGO and campaign organization in the country, although we're not that well known. We've been around for about 4 years. And we've actually had the pleasure of working with some of these groups today that are here today on this issue. So we've delivered the request, Our Water is Not for Sale, to Nestlé headquarters. Unfortunately, you can see here, I've had a talk with the head of sustainability at Nestlé, but unfortunately they didn't listen to us. So we thought the Swiss public has to know what's going on, which is why we organized this event today. We're so thankful for that you guys host us today. So thank you for that, Frederick. And without further ado, I hand over to Mike. Also, I have a call to action at the end, so please stay around so you can see how you can help. But now I'm going to hand over to Mike for more.
Thank you, Angelina, and thank you, Frederick, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. My name is Mike Balkwill. I work with the Wellington Water Watchers in Ontario, in the town of Guelph, which is an hour and a half west of Toronto. I live in Toronto, which is where I'm speaking to you from. The picture behind me is from a demonstration at the Nestlé site in our community 2 years ago with Makasha Looking Horse, who's on the panel today. It's nice to see that picture and remember that day, Makasha. You are students at Sustainability Week, and we're hoping that you share with us concerns about water, about protecting water, about ensuring that water is a human right, about the impact of climate change, the impact of plastic from water bottles on the environment, and concerns about the privatization of water, which is water is life, it's essential to life, and it should be a public trust and available to all. Thank you as well for allowing us to have this conversation with you in English. Appreciate it very much. I'm going to describe the agenda to you. I'm going to be your moderator. In a couple of moments, I'm going to give a brief overview and background to the issue of Nestlé in North America, in the US and Canada. And then we have 3 presentations. Makasha Looking Horse and Don Martin Hill of 6 Nations on the Grand in Ontario will talk about water and Nestlé and the impact of Nestlé on their community. That would be followed by a presentation by Gina Luster, who's from Flint, Michigan, and we'll talk about the impact of Nestlé's water taking and the intersection of that with the contamination of the water in Flint, Michigan, and the shutoffs of water in Detroit, Michigan. She'll talk about the intersection of those things. And Michael Roth, who's with us from Florida. And Michael's going to, while he's involved with a group called the Our Santa Fe River Incorporated, which is focusing on opposing Nestlé's water taking in his community in Florida, today he's going to speak about private equity because the North American Nestlé operations are being bought by 2 private equity firms. The format in each case will be, there will be about a 10-minute presentation from the presenters. After each presentation, we will answer questions that you have. So please put your questions in the mailbox, in the chat box. I see Alexander Linder is showing us how it's done, and he's already put a question in there. I will moderate the questions and bring them to the attention of the presenters. The presenters are also welcome to answer the questions through the chat box themselves as they wish. Somebody has asked, is the session recorded? The answer is yes. That's how the meeting's going to proceed. At the end, there will be an open question and answer period again. In addition to questions, we welcome comments. And as Ashushan has done, I invite everybody to say briefly in the chat box who you are, how you're connected, introduce yourself to others who are on the call as we get started. And in a moment, I'm going to give a short background, but I always like to start a meeting by asking this question. Hands up, are we at the same meeting? Is the agenda I've described the meeting that you think you signed up for? Great, all right, super. So I'm going to give some background. The Nestlé, the multinational that's based in Switzerland, owns water bottling operations around the world. They own 4 wells in Canada. 3 of them are in the community where I work in Ontario. And they own multiple wells and bottling operations in about 30 to 50 locations in the United States. There are groups in several of those communities who are grassroots groups who oppose Nestlé's water taking, and we're part of an informal network that has been meeting for the last couple of years in North America. And we've been very pleased to be allied with people in Switzerland, including Campax, and we've been very ably assisted by Franklin Frederick, who's based in Bern, a Brazilian activist now based in Switzerland, who's been active in opposing Nestlé for more than a decade. So we have an informal network of people who've been concerned about Nestlé's water taking around the world, and particularly in North America. Nestlé is selling their North American operations. They announced they were going to sell it in July, and they've now reached a deal with 2 private equity firms. One's called One Rock Capital and the other is called Metropolis. And the sale of their operations in North America is one of the largest transfers of private water wealth in recent history. And it's for those reasons that we're bringing attention to this. We're bringing attention to this in North America. And in the US and Canada, we are asking legislators to look into this deal. And we're asking non-governmental allies in the media to raise questions about this deal. And part of the purpose of us being here with you today is to ask you to do the same thing. We're hoping that as a result of the information we present today, you will ask legislators in your country, you will ask non-governmental allies, and you will ask the media to look into this deal and to speak against the transfer of the permits that Nestlé has to the new private equity company. We have specific demands. I'm going to highlight them just briefly. That all of the privately owned sites that Nestlé has in North America be returned to public stewardship. In our community in Ontario, and you will hear more about this from Don Martin Hill and Makasha Looking Horse, we specifically want one of the Nestlé sites to be returned to 6 Nations on the Grand, an Indigenous community who have treaty rights to that land and water. We want all of the sources where Nestlé takes water to be restored and have renewed investment in public water infrastructure, and for any outstanding commitments that Nestlé has made to their communities to be fulfilled. There are questions we have about this deal, which we think would be very helpful if these questions could be explored in Switzerland. Is Nestlé actually selling the land, wells, permits, and contracts to the private equity firms, or only the facilities, operations, and brands? This is an important question, and we'll come back to this later because in a similar circumstance in Brazil a few years ago, Nestlé sold the brands, but it was never clear whether they sold the underlying assets. Recently, in a television program broadcast, I think a couple of weeks ago in Switzerland, a legislator, Hans-Peter Portman, said that Nestlé is investing all the money they withdraw from the US and Canada in the emerging countries in order to provide the population of these countries with access to water. That's an interesting and yet dubious commitment that we hope you will raise and explore in your country. And finally, and we'll come back to this a little bit later too, can the Swiss Development and Cooperation Agency, SDC, be trusted to protect the right of communities around the world to access free and clean drinking water when Christian Frutiger, who's the former head of Nestlé Public Affairs, serves as its vice director? And the theme of the conversation that we will have today is if Nestlé can operate the way that it does in North America with the higher standard of democratic guarantees and freedoms, what are they doing in the global South where they're subject to less regulation? So we'll be presenting information today to you, but also asking these questions for you to raise. I'm going to say, just give a very brief background on the particular communities that are involved in this campaign against Nestlé. And then in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask Don Martin-Hill and Makasha to present on the situation in their community. So Nestlé takes, this may be very familiar to you, but Nestlé takes millions of gallons of groundwater from communities, mostly rural communities in Ontario, in Canada and the United States, and they pay essentially nothing for the water that they take. And I'm going to give some examples. In Southern California, they take water from the headwaters of the Strawberry Creek and in the San Bernardino National Forest, piping up miles away to a centralized trucking site. Nestlé refuses to comply with limits imposed upon them by the California State Water Resources Control Board. And in fact, the legitimacy of the permit they claim to have to take water is in dispute and is being challenged in the court right now. Nestlé takes water from 10 towns in the state of Maine, which is in the northeast corner of the United States, exporting more than 1 billion gallons of water per year. In some locations, they pay nothing for the water they take. In Maine in particular, there's a great intersection and overlap between Nestlé officials and public and state officials. So there's been, regulators have been captured by Nestlé managers. Nestlé draws water from 7 spring sites in the state of Florida, and they bottle water at 3 large-scale industrial plants, diverting 1 million gallons per day from the Santa Fe River, which is flowing 30% below historic levels due to overpumping. In Colorado, which is a state in the Midwest of the United States, Nestlé actually takes water from the Arkansas River, but they operate a pipeline to bring water from the Colorado River system into the Arkansas River to replace the water they've taken. And I don't know if I can describe this in an accurate way, but they bring the water over the Continental Divide. The Continental Divide is the space in the United States, which is a watershed from water running east or water running west. So they actually take water that's running west, bring it over the mountains into a river that runs to the east in order to replace the water that they're taking. In Ontario, at the Aberfoyle plant, water's taking is claimed by Indigenous peoples in contravention of a cease and desist order issued by the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Council. You'll hear more about that soon. And the picture behind me is a protest from the day that the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Council delivered the cease and desist order. Finally, in Michigan, Nestlé pays next to nothing for the water it extracts. So that's a brief background. That's a brief overview of the issues. There's some questions in the box, which I'll attempt to answer. I'm very pleased right now to introduce Don Martin-Hill and Makasha Looking Horse from Six Nations on the Grand. I'm not sure. Are you going first, Don?
Yeah, I'll go first.
Okay, so over to you.
Hi.
And thank you, Don, for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me and my daughter, Makasha. And I have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to share the screen. Just a little bit. I'm Mohawk Wolf Clan. I live at Six Nations of the Grand River. I'm a professor. I run several global water futures research projects. They're transdisciplinary with hydrologists to pediatricians, mental health, maternal health, and ecosystem health, led by traditional Indigenous knowledge in the community, which is the first of its kind in Canada. So we've been looking into the scientific background of what's happening with our water and how to clean it. And Makasha just happens to be at university at the same time, and I needed help. So I signed her up because you get to do that to your daughters. I'm gonna share the screen. So my background is working with Indigenous communities and traditional knowledge. And here you're seeing our youth who we put through fasting programs, well, not the rituals, and they go without food or water for 4 days. And they learn to cherish those things that we take for granted. So our culture is very immersed in water, and understanding that, you know, her blood is what keeps everything alive. And through our research project, that's where we found out what Nestle was doing. And at a time of global, I don't call it climate crisis, I'd say not climate change, climate crisis, because we're in a stage that our people are really worried about. We've been trying to warn the globe for as long as I can remember. Our elders have been really distressed. And now our youth who go into these rituals, when they come out, they talk to the leadership. And one of the things that is common in their spiritual experience, in their connection with the earth, is the danger that we're all in and how they dedicate their lives. And Makash is one of the youth that have gone through the rites of passage, as well as other ceremonies. All of our ceremonies have to do with water. And when you look at the Great Lakes of our area, our people have been here for millennia, the largest freshwater body, one of the largest in the world. And within the time the settlers arrived to today, they've completely destroyed that fresh water. So groundwater aquifers is incredibly important to our people because we see it as breast milk. It's one of the most precious of all of our waters, and yet they continue to destroy it. And Nestle is one of the main culprits doing that, not only doing it on our land without our consent, I think they pay a $500 license fee. So you're talking about communities, much as you'll hear from our friend from Detroit. Communities of color are hit the hardest by lack of access to clean water. First Nations in Canada, over 90, do not have access to clean water. Six Nations, we're near Toronto. I'm sure you heard of that place. We're surrounded by cities, but if you come on the reserve, we don't have piped, clean, treated water. Our cistern water is no longer useful. And we just found mercury in our tap water. So we have a water crisis in an era that things shouldn't be in a crisis state. We should have access to clean water. At the same time, our people then turn around and are forced to buy Nestle in order to drink water or cook with water because ours is so contaminated. We are looking at the impacts. If I go back to my culture, my people, you know, we are the 5 nations. We have a great law. Our law has 170 different laws within it, and water is protected as well as the environment. So we don't necessarily look at, well, we have a human right to water. Of course we do. That's a given. It shouldn't have to be articulated. What we talk about is our responsibility to water. And that's a very different paradigm to operate within for our people, because it's about stewarding and taking care of these things. And so when you have foreign corporations coming into your territory and withdrawing precious water that right from under your feet, while at the same time selling you that bottled water, is egregious and to me a crime against humanity. So if you look at Indigenous people's right, UNDRIP, how long we've been fighting and often going to Geneva. I just sent students there a couple of years ago. Akasha went to New York to the UN. You know, we're trying to implement and have our declaration, particularly Article 25, in that we have a right to maintain and strengthen our spiritual relationship with our traditionally owned occupied lands. And of course, we want to take on doctrine of discovery, which undermines Indigenous people worldwide, based on some guy from Europe in the 1300s who said, if you're not Christian, you have a right to these lands. So we have a lot of battles going on. Nestle is just one of them. One of the things we have created is a water declaration, and that was presented in Japan. We have a number of ways in which we've tried to articulate and bring to the rest of the world how waters do have rights. And we know our Maori friends and Bolivia, they have been able to protect their waters by declaring them either human or otherwise. We feel they have more rights than human because they sustain all life. Not a human being is not that important in that larger scheme of things. So we're working on governance and trying to implement our traditional great law, which was here long before democracy was ever discovered by Europeans. And they emulated it in the United States, but they did get it quite wrong because they had slavery and women did not have rights, whereas women are leaders in our great law. So we focus on our teachings and we provide this information to people as much as possible through our research, you know, in that your first environment is water. So the elders wanted us to look at maternal health. How is them poisoning our water, and treated water is not seen as something that they want. They want their pristine water, which is exactly what Nestle has. And we would like it returned. But I'm going to hand that over to Makasha. If you're interested, we do a podcast. We have social media sites. We just branded ourselves because I have so many different research projects. It's hard for the community to understand. So we put everything under Onigenos, which in our language means water is life. So from there, I'm going to hand it over to Makasha.
Hi everybody, Sego Gwego Makashin gets Ginigahaganu Gohonjora Wakatuhui. Hi everybody, my name is Makasha Looking Horse. I'm Mohawk, Wolf Clan, and Lakota from Six Nations Territory, Ontario. Yeah, and we'll put up our slides here. And yeah, so my relationship with water grew from when I was a young girl, because I am a Sundance leader, so I Sundance, and that's a ceremony where you go without food or water for 4 days. Since I was, and during the summertime, that's a ceremony in summertime, and during that time, that's when you pray for the health of the water. Health of the water, and you pray for the health of everything outside, including the trees, the grass, and everything that gives us life outside. And our creation story has to do with water. A woman fell from the sky and onto a turtle's back, and the world was filled with water. So water has been here for way longer than any of us, way back into our creation story. And that's how I learned the importance of water at a young age, is going through my rites of passage on my father and my mother's side at a young age, and learning the value of water. And that's one of our most important medicines as Haudenosaunee people. And so when I was working on the projects of my mother's, I learned that 90% of our community is struggling with access to clean drinking water, and households in my community still go without any running water in their household. And we also learned that there's 5 different heavy metals in our water. And so we're having huge troubles with our water. And then I also learned from Mike and from the research project that Nestle was taking 3.6 million liters of water out of our aquifer that is on our treaty land. And so I went to our Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is our confederacy, our
Traditional.
our traditional government that was implemented a long time ago, and it's still running, like my mom said, and it's still in our community today. So I went to them and I told our chiefs and our clan mothers what is happening, because our community had no idea that this was happening at all. So I took it to them and I told them what was happening,
And so I got their permission, not their permission, but their recognition and support of the movement to pursue Nestle. And so I ran I gathered a protest, and I gathered a community meeting in my community and asked them what they wanted me to do. And what they wanted me to do was run have an information session, and then a run which carried the message throughout my community of Nestle to stop taking our water. And we had a water ceremony, and then we took a bus with the help of Wellington Water Watchers to Aberfoyle, where we basically had a protest of a large amount of people, where you can see um, behind here, behind Mike, and where that picture is and where this picture is. And so we let them know that we didn't agree and we wanted them off of our land and stop taking our water. And and then a few months after, we had a meeting with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and we got them to we got them to sign a, well, not sign, but we went to pursue a cease and desist letter for and to hand it to Nestle. And so we got a cease and desist letter from our community of Six Nations, and we had another protest in the summertime, and we gave them the cease and desist letter, which stated that they needed to remove themselves from our lands and stop taking our water. And this got national news by Bernie Sanders. He's seen and shared it. This is the morning of the first protest, where we had an information session, and kids drew "Say Tent to Nestle," which means "Say No to Nestle." And our community was aware of it, and our kids knew what they wanted was for our water to be saved, because we only have like less than 2% of fresh water in the entire world. And plus, our community is already going through a hard time with getting clean water to their households that isn't contaminated um, with any heavy metals. So that's what basically made me want to um, gather my community and make this change of making them aware of Nestle, and for us as a community to move as one to get them out of our community and stop taking our water totally. And that goes for not just Nestle, but other water bottling companies, to take it and sell for profit, because it needs to be, water should be free to everybody. Um, yeah, this is, um, I've done through my research as a student.
Trying to get out of this one. We don't have time to show your story. Gosh.
Yeah, so I have went through my community, and they have expressed their worries about fresh water and how we need to protect it. I think that's maybe all the time that I have.
Okay, and
Thank you.
yeah, just have um, her podcast, which we encourage people. We archive it, so if you want to know more, Makasha has guests every week, um, and Nestle's been a running topic, as well as the overall situation of water in our community.
Yeah, so we just finished season 3, and we have about 27 episodes of activists talking about their water situation in their communities, from Grassy Narrows to other communities within Canada. We have people from the Amazon, people from New Zealand. We have a wide range of Indigenous people who are struggling, going through the same struggle with water, and having difficulties with water. Not difficulties, but
Yeah, she covers a lot of environmental racism, both
yeah.
here in the United States, and it's an important venue, and she does a great job putting it together every week. So they were timed for 10 minutes each. I'm sorry. So I
No
can't
worries.
know any of that.
No worries, Dawn. So thank you, Dawn and Makasha. I'm going to ask if we've got time for a couple of questions. So I'm going to ask if there's any questions for Dawn and Makasha to put them in the chat box. And while they're doing that, Dawn, in your presentation, you mentioned UNDRIP. And I just wonder if you could just take a minute and talk about what UNDRIP is for those who are listening in.
So I guess Six Nations connection to the Swiss, in particular Geneva, is in 1923. One of our traditional leaders, Descott Hay, went to Geneva to put in for a application for nationhood status, and we were supported by European countries, Norway, Netherlands, and Switzerland. The US blocked it, of course. So that was the beginning of Indigenous peoples' attempts to try to have a seat at the United Nations, because we are nations, nation to nation. You make treaties. You don't make treaties with groups. You make them with nations, and there are treaties that are being violated. So through the hard work of many, many Indigenous people going to the UN and advocating since Descott Hay, they now have Indigenous Peoples Permanent Forum, and they had begun drafting 20 some years ago the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights, which includes, of course, land, management, water, etc. Article 25 specifically deals with our right to control our environments. And one of the things that came out of United Nations studies by 2018 by one of my colleagues, Nindi, who works with the United Nations University with the biological inventory of 145 countries involved. One of the things they found out, mostly biologists, was that any lands and waters that were managed by Indigenous people worldwide were in the best shape. So the difference in Canada is we don't manage and control the Grand River. If we did, it would be clean. If we controlled the Great Lakes, it would be clean. We wouldn't be allowing them to destroy one of the most precious resources that our people have. It's a source of life, not a resource. So UNDRIP has been passed. Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, surprise, surprise, fought very hard to not approve it. Akasha went to the United Nations when she was 9 years old and did a prayer ceremony with youth that ran from my community to there, and they were again bringing it up for discussion, and this time it did pass. But of course, countries are not implementing it in a way that is to our expectations. So Canada gets away with looking like a nice country if you're Indigenous, and if you're an Indigenous woman, missing and murdered Indigenous women, strongly connected to water. We have over 1,700 missing and murdered women. You can go on any social media site, look up MMIW. These are things that we fight for. So we see water and the right to water and access to water connected to genocide. And actually Canada did admit that it had committed genocide against Indigenous people in the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Inquiry. So water, pipelines, man camps, Nestlé, they're all related to violations of Indigenous women in particular.
Thank you, Dawn. And again, thank you, Makasha. And a couple of people are posting, like Katharina has just posted her connection and her interest, and there have been some questions. So I appreciate that. People, if you can engage through the chat box with comments and reaction to what you're hearing, that will help us as we move forward. I'm very pleased that Gina Luster is with us today. We had an event in Canada, in Ontario, in the fall, in November of 2019, called All Eyes on Nestlé. And we had been the previous year, we had been to Flint, Michigan. The organization Gina's part of had hosted a kind of a fact-finding visit there. And then Gina came back to Guelph and presented to everybody. And Gina's going to introduce herself with the group she's with, Flint Rising, and talk about, again, the intersection of Nestlé, Flint, and Detroit. We're so happy you're with us here today, Gina. Thank you for making time, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, I got a tough act to follow behind. Makasha, you're doing some awesome work, and keep it up. I love to see the youth involved. Well, a little bit about me. Lived here in Flint, Michigan since I was about 4 or 5 years old. Migrated from the South And I got involved in water, of course, because of what happened to Flint. I think everyone now knows that we were poisoned. It was a man-made decision by our then governor, Rick Snyder, and his administration. We came together as a community from all walks of life because we all had the same problem. We were poisoned by our own elected officials. So we formed a group called Water Warriors. And so the Water Warriors kind of just was something we laughed about amongst ourselves. And here we are now 7 years later, and we've traveled all over the world and documentaries have been done about us. So I just wanted to say that because of people always refer to us as the Water Warriors. And a lot of people are like, well, how did that come about? It was just something silly we were saying amongst ourselves, and it snowballed. But anyways, I got involved in activism because I moved back home from going off to college and doing all those fun things. And I came back home and I couldn't believe what I saw. It looked like a bomb had been dropped here. The neighborhood that I grew up in was gone. The high school that I went to was torn down. The elementary school I went to is still there, but no longer a school. So it was really like shocking to me how your city can change. You go away for like 5, 10 years and come back and you can't even recognize it. So what I did was I kind of started going into meetings where I probably shouldn't have been. And I would just sit in the back and act like I belonged there, and I really didn't, because I wanted to get to the bottom of what was going on. And so this was in early 2008 when I first came back to Michigan. And I'm hearing these meetings about what's going on. Flint had a contract that was about a 50-year contract with the city of Detroit. And that contract had came up and it was time to renew it or renegotiate. So the Flint elected officials said to the Detroit elected officials, we're going to use our own water. We're tired of paying you guys $1 million a month. We're going to use our own water. And a matter of fact, we're going to build a pipeline and it's all going to be ice cream and cake. The money's going to stay in Flint. So, of course, we were like, yeah, wow, But there was also this thing in the back of our head saying, wait, where's this water going to come from? The Flint River? No, that's not going to work. That river has, since I was a kid, I was told don't play in it because a battery plant was on it. One of the first factories where they made the first car sits on this river. Everything has been put in this river. They've drained it before and found fish with teeth that look like human teeth and cars and bodies. So we're like, we gotta drink that water? How are you gonna clean this water? So what the government did is they said, we're gonna go hire all these experts. And that's how Veolia got into this mess that we're in. Veolia was hired to basically come in and consult and say, yay or nay, you can use this Flint River water. And they okayed it. And all hell broke loose. Within seconds of them switching from Detroit to Flint, our homes were poisoned. PBS Nova did a special about it. I mean, within seconds. So like I went to work that day with clean water. By the time I got back home, I didn't know I was drinking a cesspool. And the craziest part about it is no one said anything. It was a big secret. So we had to do some investigating and hire attorneys, and we found emails. And all through these emails, you keep seeing the same names come up. And we're like, wow, what's going on here? So at the end of the day, we found out that they made the decision not to put the proper chemicals to treat the water. There's a thing called corrosion control, and it would have cost like $100 a house to do this. But they made the decision not to do it because they figured they would get this pipeline going and, oh, well, we can cut some corners and they'll be fine. They didn't know that our pipes were going to disintegrate within hours, or minutes, should I say. So we then found out that we needed bottled water. Who shows up? Nestle. Okay. In 2018, they got a permit because they were pumping 250 gallons per minute. So they went to our Governor Snyder and said, we want to renew this permit, and we want to pump 400 million gallons per minute at the price of $200 a year. Mind you, Flint folks, we've got people with $5,000 water bills. And it's such a slap in the face that they can pump all the water they want from our Great Lakes. And trust me, Don, I understand everything you're saying. If you guys were in control, we wouldn't even be on this Zoom right now, probably. But sucking all of our precious water from our Great Lakes for pennies and then selling it back to us because we're in a crisis. And oh, by the way, the governor, his wife, sits on the board of Nestle. They're all friends. So, it's like you're going up against this corporate machine that's so huge. And I don't know how I am on time, but Danny, can you share the slides that you have for me? So this is a picture of me and my daughter standing on the Flint River. That's the river behind there. There's a little bridge there. And she's been awesome working alongside me. She's become a little mini me. She went to Canada with us and she was looking forward to that Switzerland trip, but it didn't happen. But we're going to make it happen one of these days. But back to Nestle. So we found out that his wife was sitting on the Nestle board, and here we are buying this water that is really our water. It should be free, buying it back from them, and they're making a profit. So I then got really mad and started reaching out to some other activists that I know. Can you change to the next slide? And reached out to a group that Flint Rising had a relationship with out in Boston, Massachusetts, which is out east. And the name of that group is Corporate Accountability. And we had did a little homework on them, and they had went up against these jokers, and they were winning. So next thing I know, I'm in Nigeria at a Nestle plant with them protesting. And this is us here in the village. And there were armed guards waiting on us. And it says here, I want to read this because it was so crazy. Just days before our international delegation visited the plant, the Nestle plant, and according to local sources, because Nestle representatives heard we were coming, Nestle quickly upped its corporate social responsibility efforts. The corporation constructed this rudimentary tap to supplement another that has long stopped working. Villagers told us the tap worked for one day before it also went dry. So you can see here in the picture, they put these faucets out, and yeah, they worked for one day just because they knew we were coming. And there was another picture. If you look behind the people, you see those water tanks? Go back real quick for me. Those tanks up there are supposed to be catching water. Well, what they did was they went to the chief and told him, we're going to get you running water. We're going to put solar panels on top of your roofs. Well, when we got there, we found out there was no water in those drums and the solar panels were not connected. You can go to the next slide. And this is just us in the village talking to the chief there. And he was telling us the story about, he was like pointing up, telling me about this solar panels that should be working, and they weren't even connected. They just threw them up there to fool the people. And can you go to the next slide, please? So this here is my boss, Naira Sharif. Some folks on this already know about Naira. She's awesome. But we infiltrated the Nestlé plant here in Michigan. So we got Michael Moore to get us some buses, all of his film crew, and we went up into the plant and we demanded, first of all, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And how dare you try to sell water back to us, knowing that we're dying over here, Legionnaires. We need this water. So we did kind of force their hand, and they started donating water to the water pods that we had, because we were just at the mercy of people all over the country doing donations and driving truckloads of water to Flint. That's how bad it got. You couldn't find a case of bottled water on the shelf because the whole town was panicking. We're taking baths with the water, we're cooking with the water, we're brushing our teeth with the water. And it was just such a slap in the face to have to go pay for this water that they're pumping for basically free. And they're having parties with caviar, and we got pictures where they're having their wives cakes that are out of Chanel bags, and they're just living their best life, and we're over here dying. And so, and that's my daughter. We got so many water donations thanks to the community. She built a fort in our living room, and she would sit on it and just tell stories about what we've been going through. And that shirt she has on is someone we know. And in his little afro, there's a map of Flint, and the shirt says dying for a drink of H2O. I think I got another slide. And so to make this full circle, not only are we upset with Nestle because of what they're doing here and in other countries, but they are always trying to cover up. And this selling their assets and all of that, I just think it's a PR stunt. They're going to still own that land. They're not going to let the land go. It's beautiful up there. Why would they let it go? It's just a way to kind of hide their hand and say, okay, y'all applying too much pressure to us. Step back. This is what we're going to do to try to just ease you over. No, that's not the solution. And we shouldn't stand back and let them get away with it. We got to continuously call them out. They're doing this everywhere. They're popping up everywhere. I mean, I wouldn't think there would be this beautiful plant in Nigeria next to a village, walking distance to a village with no running water. How is this happening? So this is a picture of my daughter, Kennedy, because we have to go to doctor's appointments all the time because of it wasn't just lead in our water. We had bacteria that, like I said, Legionnaires hadn't been seen since the war. Scarlet fever, just things you don't even hear about anymore. When those pipes burst, it woke up every ugly thing that you can imagine that had been sitting there for years. And so we tried to make lemonade out of lemons. And when she went to her doctor's appointment last week, I noticed this hanging from the ceiling. And it was some of the water bottles that Flint Rising had. we were like recycling water bottles. And the artist used them, and I was like, wow, they made something beautiful out of something so ugly. And I just thought that was great to see that hanging in Dr. Mona Atish's office. So that was nice to see. But is that my last slide, Danny?
Yeah, it's the last one.
Okay, I thought so. But yeah, it's just a shame how you can follow the dots from the Detroit shutoffs to Flint to these imaginary bondholders. And then in the back of it all, holding the strings is Nestle and Viola. We gotta do something. And one of the things I think that's so awesome about this is we're coming together from all over the world. And even though it was one day in Nigeria, they knew we were coming, but that was one day out of months they didn't get any water. So even though we didn't accomplish our goal, at least for that day, someone has some clean drinking water. It's just a shame that you have to play cat and mouse with these corporations. And we just got to keep sticking together because at the end of the day, we're all wanting the same goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you for your presentation and thank you for your hard work, for your leadership in your community. On behalf of your community, on behalf of everyone. You'll see in the comment box, somebody saying, I admire your fight and all you did to make this public, Gina. I noticed there's not many questions. I hope the fact there aren't many questions means you're really engaged and enjoying this or appreciating the information you're hearing. And I encourage you to put comments like Theo did into the box with whatever your reaction is to what you're hearing. And Gina, I think that one of the things that you said that really just sums up the whole story and in some ways sums up the whole global story is that, Nestle has put itself in the position where people are forced to buy water that should be free so they can make a profit. And in addition, they leave us with all the consequences of that, whether it's plastic, whether it's the water that has been drained, whether it's the impact on the community. It is, as Makasha and Don said, against human rights, and it is enormously exploitive and wasteful. I'm going to introduce Michael Roth now. Michael, he'll tell you about his connection to Florida and Nestle there, but our understanding is that your university, St. Gallen, is a leading business school, a leading business university. And so we've asked Michael to speak to the private equity aspect of this deal, what the consequences are and our worries about that. So Michael, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. As Mike said, I have a business background. I was a CPA for 30 years in public practice, doing small business mostly, and capped that off with 10 years in an ice cream store that my wife and I ran, which was kind of putting to practice what I'd spent 30 years learning. And in retirement now, we moved to the Santa Fe River. And as Mike mentioned earlier, on the Santa Fe River, we're having a bit of a spat here. We've been trying to fight a permit. I got involved in our Santa Fe River. I became a water warrior about 5 or 6 years ago. And the last 2 years have been spent fighting against a permit. We have a slightly different situation here. Usually Nestle is the direct permittee. In our particular case, it's a third party who is getting the water for free. They're actually turning around and selling it to Nestle. And it kind of puts us in a different position too in the private equity matter, which I'm going to discuss with you right now. I'm going to put in the comments when I'm done our website, oursantaferiver.org, where you can go and see what our last 2 years have been all about. And I kind of direct you there. But for today, Mike asked me to talk about private equity and the water wars, a match made in, well, we'll see. I'm going to talk a bit about private equity as a concept, and then a bit about global water management, and then we'll consider them as bedfellows. Private equity firms are, as their name suggests, private, meaning they're owned by their founders, managers, or a limited group of investors, not the public, as would be traded in the stock market. These organizations buy companies that are struggling or have growth potential, and then try to repackage them, speed up their growth, and theoretically make them work better. Then they sell them to another firm, take them public, or find some other way to offload them. Private equity's investors are institutional ones, meaning pension funds, sovereign governments, and endowments, or accredited investors who can meet a certain set of criteria that allow them to make riskier bets. That means rich people. Private equity's #1 priority isn't the long-term health of the company it buys. It's to make money, and as is the case in so many facets of investing today, to make money fast. They most often do this by the incurrence of debt in the purchased company, debt to restructure the debt of the company, and debt to pay the equity firm's management fee. So is private equity a giant money monster that eats up companies and spits them out as the husks of what they once were, prioritizing short-term gains over creating long-term value and doing a ton of damage to everyday Americans in the process? Let's hang on to that thought. As to water privatization, in 2009, the publication In the Public Interest argued that privatization of water and public water systems pose underappreciated risks to both public rights and national security in the United States. All life depends on water. Therefore, all communities, social and political systems, and economies depend on this finite resource for survival and vitality. However, both human rights and national security protections are inadequate to guarantee that all people will receive sufficient quantities of good quality water to meet basic human needs, as we've unfortunately heard in several cases here today. It has been suggested that the public needs water laws and policies that protect and facilitate the integrity and sustainability of human and natural water systems. Although human rights theories and national security policies may be insufficient by themselves to achieve this goal, a new concept of water stewardship would create new institutional capacity and responsibility by imposing 6 fiduciary duties on state governments and the federal government for the benefit of the public: the duty of security, the duty of conservation, the duty of sustainability, the duty of equity, the duty of investment, and the duty of long-range place-based planning. Members of the public, while being beneficiaries of these duties, would also share responsibility for acting on them. According to Gunnar Adgerson in August 2002, quote, privatization of water services is now virtually compulsory for developing countries. Both the World Bank and the IMF impose it as a precondition for funding assistance. The privatized water sector worldwide is dominated by a handful of multinational companies. They are not interested in serving the poorest people, who are not seen as profitable customers. Water customers are becoming the privilege of those who can pay high prices. End of quote. I should point out here that the discussion of privatization can refer to municipal outsourcing of water management or actual corporate entitlement to a given quantity of water. While most examples of abuse of water management pertain to the former, they create a clear example of mixing the profit motive with corporate water responsibilities. The water wars in the state of Georgia illustrate the power of water privatization and commodification forces in US society and their deleterious effects. In recent years, Georgia has had at least 11 water systems operated by private water companies. Most famously, Atlanta granted a 20-year contract to United Water in 1998 to operate its municipal water system, which Atlanta had to terminate just 4 years later for quality of service and mismanagement problems. So, is the management of the water crisis to private equity a good thing? Proponents of privatization cite one of the main advantages as increased efficiency of the private sector compared to the public sector, which would lead to improved water distribution, which you may say is arguable. This, along with other cost-saving measures, would result in lower bills for customers. Outsourcing water management to private entities would also make it possible to divide maintenance costs of the water mains network between different companies. On the other side of the coin, those who are opposed to privatization point out the risks involved in entrusting the management of water resources to private entities. Some of the problems include higher water rates and the difficulty in ensuring that the new managers respect their obligations to develop the water supply in poorer areas where consumption is lower. Again, we've heard examples of that firsthand today. The People's Global Action Network has posited that, quote, bottled water exemplifies the final consequence of capitalism, the disappropriation and profit maximization of the most pristine sources of life, because water is life, and environmental destruction is for human greed and luxury. As a consequence, groundwater is being depleted at incredible rates to fill millions of plastic bottles and cans with which we quench our thirst, leaving behind a massive mountain of rubbish. The water business is greater in turnover than oil, and well-known brands are the diamonds in Nestlé's portfolio in a global water market that is dominated by transnational capital. And that brings us to One Rock. Nestlé said on February 16th that it would sell Pure Life and some other struggling North American water brands like Polar Spring, Deer Park, Ozark, Ice Mountain, Zephyr Hills, Arrowhead, and Splash to One Rock Capital Partners and Metropolis and Company for $4.3 billion. Nestlé's North American water business had sales of about $3.8 billion in 2019. According to Jean-Philippe Berchi, an analyst at Bank Vontobel IG, the valuation, quote, is highly attractive for such an underperforming business. And he goes on to say that Nestlé could parlay the funds in more productive lines. According to the One Rock website, One Rock focuses on control stake equity investments in what it calls high potential middle market companies in North America. The website says, we draw on the expertise of our investors and operating partners to handle complex situations like corporate carve-outs, misunderstood companies, management transitions, and under-optimized companies. One Rock works collaboratively with company management and its operating partners to develop a comprehensive business plan focused on growing the enterprise and its profitability to enhance long-term value. The billionaire investor Dean Metropolis, who is joining up in One Rock's purchase of the Nestlé brands, is known for reviving some worn-out products like Bumblebee Tuna and Chef Boyardee. Bottled water has been a headache for Chief Executive Officer Mark Schneider of Nestlé, and experts expect it will be challenging to fix. The segment eclipsed soft drinks in popularity in the United States after a surge of demand in the early 2000s, which attracted low-price competition and criticism that the business wastes plastic and precious natural resources. In 2020, COVID-19 restrictions pummeled consumption as a large proportion of bottled water is consumed in restaurants and tourist destinations. As competition heats up and critics get louder, the question remains whether Metropolis will succeed in cracking a problem that Nestlé apparently preferred to step away from. But the bigger question is, how deleterious will this and future resource grabs by entities solely focused on the bottom line be to the public's ability to sustainably access clean and safe water? Another important question is, how and when should the public, through its governments, intervene? So this is a question that we need to discuss and we need to get answered, and we need to figure out how and when to intervene, because left on its own, the profit motive is going to win out. Let me see if I can do this. There you go. I just put up in the comments our Santa Fe Rivers website. If you go to the news tab on our website and type in Nestlé in the search bar, you can get a history of our battle. You can find out what our Santa Fe River's gone through. We currently lost the battle on February 23rd after 2 years of legal wrangling and discussion. Our water management district approved the permit for Seven Springs Water Company, the water company that I said is kind of acting as a broker in the particular Nestlé deal here in North Central Florida. However, as we speak, I think our lawyers are preparing to enter our petitions to oppose this decision. Thank you very much for having me. I've never been to Switzerland before. I really appreciate the invite.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. We're in the last part of our session today, and so there's still time for some questions. Dawn has to run to her next class. Dawn's a professor at McMaster University, so she's saying goodbye. Thank you very much, Dawn, for being with us.
Makasha's got it.
And Makasha's going to hang on. So just as kind of a way of kind of concluding, there've been a couple of comments in the chat box. Renee says, I'm deeply touched by the information. Will we unite in information, emotional connection, we shall overcome. I feel your struggle. I'm inspired by your strength and courage. Please, while we're here, if you have any comments for the presenters, please make them now. I think I wanted to just make a couple of closing comments, part of, which is part of the strategy of why we're here and why we're so pleased you invited us to be here. Nestlé as a company is very sensitive to criticism. They are very sensitive about their brand. In fact, we believe they're leaving North America because the Canadians, ourselves in Canada, and our friends in the US have been so effective in criticizing and raising public awareness that they have felt, frankly, forced to leave. And while we're still not clear whether they're really going, whether it's a shell game, a kind of a shell game, as someone said, they are very sensitive to that. And we are aware that in the Canada and the US, even with the challenges that we face, that we have privileges that may not be available to all peoples in the global South, where Nestlé is active too, as Gina said with her visit to Nigeria. So if you are moved by what you're hearing today, you can really help us by amplifying these questions in the media, with non-governmental organizations, with your legislators. And I know that in a couple of moments, Angelina from Campax is going to talk about how to do that. My understanding is that Switzerland has a world-class public sanitation system. And I think Switzerland and the people of Switzerland should want that for everyone else in the world too. And that Nestlé's behavior in privatizing water is in direct contravention of that. And Gina's very moving story about how Nestlé profiteered from the illness and the deaths of people in Flint, Michigan, should be of concern to anybody in Switzerland. And again, I'm not as familiar with your country as I am with my own, but it's interesting to me that the Swiss Development Corporation, which I think is involved in water projects in the global South and maybe involved in water privatization, has acted in very friendly ways to Nestlé. Franklin has posted in the chat box their connection to the World Water Group. And that, it raises questions. I don't know who Christian Frudiger is as a person, but the fact that he was head of global affairs, PR for Nestlé, and is now working for the Swiss Development Agency involved in water development work in the global South is of concern to me. And I think it's a question that could and should be asked in Switzerland. As you heard Don and Makasha say, it's part of a larger ongoing colonial project. Colonialism isn't over. Colonialism isn't over. It's done in different ways. We're having the colonizing of water around the world. Just recently, you may know this, just recently Wall Street has opened up hedge funds to trade in water futures. In Wall Street now you can invest in water futures. These are deeply, deeply concerning matters, as Michael Roth pointed out to us. I think I would make a connection just briefly as well. The Water Watchers was fortunate to be invited to Vittel, France 2 years ago on a fact-finding trip. Vittel was the international headquarters for Nestlé's water operations. And I was really struck by the fact that in Vittel, Nestlé has taken so much water that the aquifer is declining. And in order to make up for that decline, they proposed to build a pipeline from another town to bring drinking water from the other town to Vittel so that people in Vittel would have drinking water and so that Nestlé would be allowed to continue to pump from the aquifer. And as crazy as that sounds crazy to me anyway, they're doing the very same thing in Colorado. As I mentioned at the very top, they're pumping water from one river system, the Colorado, into the Arkansas River to replace water they've taken from the aquifer. So just imagine this for a moment. Nestlé pumps water out of the aquifer, they put it in bottles. In order to compensate for that, they bring water by pipeline from another river into a river. It doesn't go into the aquifer. What kind of a sustainability circle is that? It's not. They're doing it in Vittel, they're doing it in Colorado. Where else are they doing it? This is a kind of insanity that must be stopped. We're doing our part in Canada, we're doing our part in the US. We're hoping that you can help us and do your part in Switzerland and be part of this global struggle to ensure that water is for life, that water is stewarded by the public, and in some instances that means being stewarded by Indigenous peoples. We're very, very happy and pleased that you made time for us today. We're very glad to be your guests. We had planned to visit you. Gina was mentioning this, so this will be the last thing I say, Angelina, before I turn it over to you. We had planned a conference in Switzerland last March for World Water Day. And there were people coming from communities across North America, people coming from France. It was being hosted by several NGO organizations in Switzerland. We were really looking forward to it. It was one of the many plans that were canceled as the pandemic spread around the world. We're pleased that we could visit with you in this way today. Thank you very much for your attention. Angelina, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I am so moved. This was way more than I expected. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I will share my screen again. Okay, I hope everybody can see this. So we've set up the letter that Mike mentioned in the very beginning as an open letter to the Green and Socialist Party in Switzerland. There's a QR code you can sign, or the URL you can just go to and sign it. We will set these up in German, French, and Italian in the next couple of days as well. So if you have friends or family who don't speak English, that's fine. They will be catered to. There's our Instagram and Facebook handle, as well as our Twitter handles, all the same, Campax.org. And if you want to get in touch with me on how you can help in Switzerland, or if you want to get in touch with any of the panelists, you can just send me an email at the email address that is right there. I will make sure to connect you to whoever you need. Yeah, thank you so much. That was really amazing. Also, we have a second very similar panel with slightly different panelists, though, on the 22nd of March. So if you want the info on that, also just send me an email if you want to know more, ask more questions. Yeah, thank you so much.
Angelina, I forgot one thing. May I interrupt?
No, sure, go ahead.
In the chat box, we're having an international rally Thursday night, which will be midnight your time. Now, I know students, you know, they work late, you're studying all night, and around midnight, you might want to have a break. So there's a link there. We're having an international rally online with speakers and musicians, and I invite you all to join us. Sorry, Angelina, I meant to include that earlier. Pardon my interruption.
That's all good. Please, guys, do join. If it's okay, I'm just going to leave this screen for a bit so everybody has time to write down whatever info they need. But I'm just going to give it back to wrap up, if that's okay.
Yes, so thank you very much. I don't have a lot to say still. It was a lot to digest. I really hope, Mike and Angelina, that this was to your expectations and that we could give you this opportunity to raise awareness about this topic. And I really hope that everybody who showed up tonight won't walk out of this session forgetting everything they've just heard. I hope this sticks to your mind and that this topic will be with you for some more time, and that you definitely get involved with the possibilities that were just shown to you by Angelina and Campax. And I'm really glad that you reached out to me so we could set up this whole session tonight. And from my part, I would only like to ask you if you could fill out a short little survey for us to improve our events in general. And I hope to see you in more events still during our Sustainability Week, where we will talk about a broad variety of other sustainability topics still. And we're continuing here in about 10 minutes at 7. And I wish you all a great evening and hope to see you soon.